welcome to session 8, Finding Our Way Home. This time we're going to explore what makes songs work. So far, the only full song that we learned was Peace Peace, and Peace Peace is very much not a typical song. The form is super short, it's one bar, and it's more of a vibe with a repeating pattern. And out in the world, you'll find that some songs, like Peace Peace, are kind of directionless. You can choose to play those songs so that there is a story and then a return to home, but you don't really have to. There's other songs though that, and I would say most songs are like this, where there's a stronger sense of direction. The song itself guides us away on a journey and then back toward a resting place. It's part of the song itself. There's tension created, and then that creates room for resolution, the returning to home within the structure of the very song. So today we'll illustrate this idea so you can hear it and then expand from there. We'll start with a folk song where you can hear that the song sets up expectations for what comes next. And then when you improvise or write your own music, you can choose to use these ideas as you want, or also decide to surprise the listener by not fulfilling the expectations that you've set up. So the main way this works is actually we're going to see how one special chord can set us up for other chords. We foreshadowed it a little bit previously, but today we'll really get into it and drive it home. So we'll start with the song Amazing Grace. Has anyone heard Amazing Grace before? It's likely most everyone has heard Amazing Grace. It's so common. I mentioned it last class even because Aretha Franklin sang an incredible version of it, but we didn't spend time on it last class. For today, I put some other really interesting and beautiful versions of the song in the class playlist. The first is from a minister and singer named Whitley Phipps, who tells some of the history of the song, which is mind-blowing, and he demonstrates the melody on the black keys on the piano, and then he sings it, and it's a really magnificent experience. And you should check out the other versions too. There's one with Tori Kelly singing with John Batiste, and also Diana Ross with a full orchestra. You can also search Amazing Grace. It's one of the most performed and covered songs throughout history, so it's kind of surprising actually who's made a cover of this song. So I'll play the core of the song on the piano. We'll start simple, and then we'll use the structure to understand a few concepts, and then find ways for you to explore substituting your own chords, harmonies. And then from there, we can move on and generalize the lessons from Amazing Grace as an example to open up possibilities for your playing, and across all styles, no matter what style you choose to explore. So we'll do this in C, and I'll play the melody, pretty much just the melody and the bass. that's it. So we really just have three main chords in this song. My bass note only changed from C to F and then G. We start in C, it's the one chord, and sometimes we move to the F, which is what chord? Does anyone know? It's the 4 chord, and sometimes we move to the G, which is what chord? This is the 5 chord. It looks like this. So with a priority on the lyrics, we show the chords next to them. And I've tried to line up where the words are sung with the chords, so the chord symbols don't really line up with each other. But we just have C, F, and G, and I actually didn't put the chord numbers on here so that you can start associating it yourself. And sometimes I might show a chart like this and only show the chord numbers, and you'll have to figure out the chord letters yourself, depending on what key we're in. And so when we're in C, we pretty much just move to the F, and then we move back to the C, and then sometimes we move to the G, the 5 chord, move back to the C, sometimes again to F, the 4 chord, back to C. So it's actually quite simplistic in its movement. There's only kind of a few different variations on this. So we already know how to play C, F, and G. You can play the tenths from last class or triads on the white keys with the name of the chord as the bottom note. So for example, it sounds better as a tenth instead of a third down, because down here this doesn't sound quite as nice as the tenth. So if I try to play the tenth, it'll kind of look like this. Or the easier way to do it is to sing it, and then I only need to play. You see how it works? And then if I continue to get to the G part, now the tenth is the same as the melody note, so I only need to play. So that's with the tenths to harmonize. You can see how it works harmonically this way with the very simple structure of the chords to guide you, because when we start to add variations to it, then you'll know how it works, and I'll show you very soon. So, by the way, when we talk about these 1, 4, and 5 chords, these happen to be the clearest signals in a song. Most songs will at some point go to the sound of the 4 chord, and this usually tells the listener, okay, we're away from home. And then at some point there's the sound of the 5 chord, which tells the listener, We're heading back home. We're going to head to 1. How does that work? So let's start with the 5 chord and try to figure out, why does 5 lead to 1? Why does the sound of G lead us to the sound of return to C? Just listen to this before I even show it. So this sound, this transition, is the most common pathway by far, and I mean 99% of the time, for a song to indicate what's happening next. There is an inevitability to it. And by the way, that also means it can be very powerful to subvert the listener's expectation. If you set this up, then the composer can surprise you with a different sound. For example, so there's one sound, one special interval that creates this forward momentum, the sense of inevitability, this anticipation, and it's the interval we're playing in the right hand. It looks like this. It's this interval, and it's not only in this key. This just happens to be the key we're playing right now, the white keys. This tritone is I was actually going to ask if anyone knew what it was called, but I gave it away. It's called a tritone. It's quite unstable and not necessarily pleasant, and it has been nicknamed the devil's interval because it's so dissonant. It's kind of like it forces a reconciliation with ourselves, because what do you do with this? If you just repeat it, it's kind of a horror movie. The interval it's called a tritone. When it appears, there's this intention to destabilize, to make the song change. And to find this interval, we actually go between the 4th and the 5th. It's like the in-between level. So a fast way to find it is, we can see it in B major. We know that in B major, we have the 5th here, F sharp, and the 4th is the E. So between the 4th and the 5th, we have this note. Yeah, and if you play all of them together, you can hear the dissonance. It's quite bad. But good for a horror movie. Now, this is the in-between interval. So you can always find the tritone by looking for the 4th and the 5th and going in between them. So going back to the sound of this, it creates chaos and demands resolution. But resolution to what? How do we understand what is happening in terms of the motion that it asks, or that it creates in our ear? Well, the easiest place to go from this chaotic place is down the path of least resistance. So we change this interval to the closest notes to it that bring us into harmony and peace again. So we move down. And you'll see that this motion, when I go from the B to the C, there's no other notes in between. There's no black note. So this is the very next note on the piano, and the same here when I go from the F to the E. It's the very next note. So it's really the closest possible interval that we're moving to. So this B and F resolve to C and E, which is C major. And this gives us our main clue as to why the 5 chord is a special chord, because among the 7 modes, the 5 chord is the only chord that contains the tritone interval as part of its sound. And in the key of C, that's G. This is our 5 chord. I've been playing it, and we played it in previous classes too, because even Peace Piece had it. But in Peace Piece there was no tritone, it was more harmonious, because we didn't play the B. But we still, it's like we get part of the anticipation of the 5, because we're in the 5 chord, but we don't play the full tritone experience. But if we do, then that really gives an extra demand for resolution. So the core of the sound is G in the bass, with B and F above it in the right hand, is the easiest way to play it. And the chord is spelled G7, also called G dominant. All these things are the same. Whenever you hear letter number, it means the 5 chord, the dominant chord. If you remember some lessons ago, we introduced B7, which was we got to it by starting with B major, and all we did was we took the 7th note of B major and made it a flat. And that's all you need to do to make something a 7 chord. Playing this chord tells the listener, change is coming. We're heading back home. And we're going to go back to C now. So playing this G7, tells the audience that there might be a C chord coming up. It's kind of magic, because even if the audience is filled with musicians who understand this, they can feel the anticipation of the chord before being able to describe it. And I believe it's actually the most powerful force in harmonic music. Now let's see what happens when we extend the idea a little bit. So we go from G7 to C major, okay? What happens if I then change the C major to a C7? So just like we did with B, and I flatted the 7 to make it a flat 7, or a 7 chord, we're going to do the same with C. So how do I change this into a C7 chord? I also take the 7th note and make that a flat. So I go to the next note below, which is this black key, B flat. So now in C, if I play our 10th, this is signaling a C major, but then I add the note that we've just transformed we have a 7 chord again, and a 7 chord sound. This tells the listener change is coming. We're now playing a 5 chord. But where does this go to? I thought C major was a 1 chord. Well, yes, C major with this note is a 1 chord, but once we change it to a C7, it becomes a 5 chord. So now we have a new quest, which is to look for the 1 again, because we're no longer in the 1. It's no longer a stable situation. So if G7 is the 5 chord of C, then what is C7 the 5 chord of? Does anyone know? The answer is F major. Because C is the 5th mode of F. Or you can go down 4. Okay, that was the most music theory we've had in one sitting. How are we feeling about this right now? Are there any questions? So I'm going to play Amazing Grace again and recap the main points. This time when I play it, I'm going to emphasize the nature of G7 so that you can hear the G7 yearning for the resolution to C. And I'm also going to play C7 and emphasize the nature of the C7 with the tritone so you can hear it yearning for the F chord. So let me put up this slide because we're going to make sure that these chords have the notation of the dominant in them. So if you'll see, we actually change many of the chords, 3 of the chords, well, 2 different ones in 3 instances to a 7 chord so that we anticipate what's coming. The first note, the first substitution that we do here, you can see the G7, the chord after the first G7 is C, because it's going to tell us, it's going to tell our ear, oh, the sound of C is coming. And then we also have a C7 here, which tells our ear, oh, there's change coming, and maybe we'll go to F. So let's hear that in practice. Do that one more time, faster, and where you can see the chords being played. So the key points are the 5 chord, also known as the dominant, creates motion in a song. It contains the unstable tritone interval, which calls for resolution. And we can transform a major chord into a 5 chord by flatting the 7th note. The sound of the 5 chord makes our ears anticipate the next one. So now that we're looking at a song structure and seeing some basics of how the song works, we can make variations. The next thing we'll do is try them on Amazing Grace, and know also that the same ideas apply to any song. I'll give you 2 tools today to customize a song, make your own variations. Over time, there's other tools that can be built on top of these. The first one is we substitute a new chord for an existing chord. So let's do that first. Here's some substitutions you can try. Now, Amazing Grace only has 3 chords, the 1, the 4, and the 5. So I'll give you some ideas for what you can substitute. When there's a 1 chord on the chart, which is C, you can try swapping in the 3 chord or the 6 chord. And we can just start doing this with the tenths. You don't have to play the whole chord. You can get the whole sound just with the 10th, or the 3rd if you're playing it only with your left hand. So during the 1 chord, when it's C, we can swap in either E or A. And then when it's the 4 chord, we can swap in the 2 or the 6, which is the D or the A. And then when it's the 5 chord, we can swap in, well, there's not a swap actually, because the 5 chord is so strong, there's not another chord that can substitute for it, but we can invert it. I consider inverting a chord also substituting the chord, but we have to go over inversions really quickly. So what are inversions? They are the same chord rolled to a different ordering of the spelling. So I'll show you. If we have a C triad, inverting this means we roll these same notes to different registers. So the C, if we roll up, the C goes here. So this is an inversion, and then we do it again. So you can see how it's kind of like if you imagine a big wheel on the keys with certain extrusions, it'll just make this. Because we move one note to the next octave at one time. And we can go down also. And further. And we can do the same with our other chords too, because this is our 1 chord getting inverted in different places, and there's only 3 variations before it starts repeating again, because now this is the same. So we can do the same with the 4 chord. If you've never done this before, it'll take some getting used to, but I think the best way is to understand how it works, and then you can try it. You can see how, okay, I'm gonna roll this up, so I'm gonna move just the bottom note to be the top note, and again, the bottom note becomes the top note. And again, the bottom note becomes the top note. And we'll do the same with the 5 chord, the G. Let's go down this time. The top note becomes the bottom note. The top note becomes the bottom note again. And one more time. So with the G, there's no real substitutions for the chord, but inverting is pretty great, actually. So we can actually already hear what that sounds like. We'll try some different versions of Amazing Grace just by changing some of the chords. Now, you can start when you do this, you can start just by changing 1 or 2. So I'll demonstrate by starting the song and making a few changes, and then eventually more with just swapping the chord or using inversions. So this is an inversion because I have E on the bottom, but it's still a C. Again. That's also an inversion. Because I'm not playing the C on the bottom. Also an inversion. Inversion of the 5. Let's try some substitutions. Substituting, instead of the 1, we play the 6. G7, inverted. Six instead of 1. Two instead of 4. This is the 3 instead of 1. So this starts to open doors, because as we find new ways to play, they can be built on what new structures are created. So as we'll see when we start adding chords, we can really start to trick out the structure and to make new forms and to go in totally different directions. You'll already start to see that in the there's some great examples in the playlist of the different versions of Amazing Grace. There's all three versions have different substitutions, so you can start to hear what things are possible. Let's go over the second main pathway, inserting new chords, and then we can kind of expand the palette even more. So this is the second way. In the class notes, I'll give examples of inversions if you're not already familiar. And actually, before we move on to inserting chords, I want to present Adventure 17, which is to play Amazing Grace and try substituting one or more chords with singing or without. It's up to you. It's actually going to be easier with singing because you don't have to keep track of the melody with the hands, because actually that's a lot of work to do the melody and different harmonies. So I encourage you to sing the song. You can just start by substituting one or more, or just start with one, and you can do inversions, which are, they might be a little more straightforward than trying the other modes to substitute chords at first, but check out both options and see if you like anything that comes out, and send me the results, or let me know if you have any questions, because this is starting to get very heady and theory based. So I want to urge you to reference it with how it sounds, and if you have trouble finding things, then let me know. So as we get into the second pathway, we're going to insert new chords in anticipation. So there's two ways of doing that, but one way is a way that we've already done, which is to use approach chords. If you'll remember from last lesson, we had 3 common approach chords in C, between the 2 and the 3, between the 4 and the 5, and between the 5 and the 6. So what does that look like? To review really quick, between the 2 and the 3, we have this. That's 1. This is 2. This is 3. And between the 2 and the 3, we have the flat 3, or the sharp 2. And it goes in either direction. And between the 4 and 5, play that without the anchor of the C on the top, only the 10ths, then it sounds like this. So already we can use this in Amazing Grace, because whenever we want to go to, let's say, a 4 chord, we can play an approach chord of sharp 4 before going to the 4. For example, that was a little clumsy because I wanted to highlight the existence of it. A little smoother would be like this. Or you can do kind of a substitution and insertion by delaying the actual 4 chord to after it was normally supposed to come, like this. And then we still end up playing the 4 chord. It just has a shorter time because it's squeezed before the 1 chord comes back. So I will also put the you'll have the chord chart for Amazing Grace in the class notes, but then also you'll have the sheet music too. So for those of you who understand sheet music, you can look on that and reference it. And it might be nice to either print out the sheet music or annotate it so that you can actually see where the chords are and write in possible substitutions and insertions of chords, either ones that you want to try out or the ones that you have found that you like, because then you can see where they happen and also kind of reference the possibilities visually, or like you can see the map of it as well as play it on the piano. And if you want to send like a picture of your annotated sheet music, you can also send that to me in addition to recordings, or only that and not recordings, whatever you feel like. If you make some explorations, I want to know about it. So it also, our inserting of chords, inserting of approach notes also applies if we do substitutions on chords. So let's say instead of going to the 4 chord, because we can try substituting a 2 chord for the 4 chord, we play the 2 chord instead. This is the 2 instead of the 4. So I can also anticipate that 2. That might be a little much. Let's try the technique of substituting the approach chord and then delaying the substituted chord. You'll see what I mean. I don't know if I like how that sounds, but it's a possible approach chord. So you can try things like that. And we also have the last approach chord that we didn't try yet, which is between the 5 and 6. Because instead of going straight directly to the 6, I went through the flat 6. That's a tricky thing to do because I substituted the 6 for the 1 and added the approach before the 6. But now I'm at the end of the song, so that presents a puzzle, because if I'm at the end of the song and we don't feel like it's over, what happens next? Well, maybe I have to play the whole song again or find a way to just play like a cadence and to go back. For example. So you can start to see possibilities for substituting and adding approach chords. There's also one other way to do approach chords, and that comes from what we talked about earlier, which is discovering the most powerful force in harmonic music, which is the five. This power of the five, the magic of having the tritone point us to somewhere because it creates a tension, is something that we can add to any part of the song at any point. So if you know that the 5 chord leads to the 1 chord, you can make a 5 chord of any chord to lead you to the chord that you want. Even in the beginning of the song, we could add another 5 chord. And you could do it for every chord. It would be a little bit obnoxious to do it every time. Let's see. So here we'll do, we'll add another 5 chord here to go into the 4, and we've already seen how to do that, which is to make the C a C7, which leads us into the F. And we can add another 5 here. When I play chords like this, it's because we're playing the melody note and what gives us the 7 sound. In this case, the G7, and the tritone of the G is here. So here, I can also add another 5. I mean, you can add 5s anywhere you want, but I'm going to give an example of adding a 5 before this 5. So we didn't have a way before to approach the G from its own 5, but we can now generalize the idea of going from 5 to 1, 5 to 1, 5 to 1, by saying that a dominant wants to resolve up a 4th or down a 5th. So for any note, for any chord that you want to resolve to, you can go down a 4th to find what resolves to it. It's like the undo feature. You keep undoing the previous chord to see what comes before, and you can add that chord. So what would come before the G is a D. Because now the G leads to a D, the D leads to a G, which leads to a C, which can lead to an F, depending on, and so on. You actually go through all the keys this way, and that's a great exercise, not for this class, this session, but we're gonna just show a few steps. So if you want to undo to the last 5 to 1, to go backwards from G, you start in D. classes in the song. Did you see how that worked? So instead of going from C to G, I went from C to D7, so that's another technique we can have. It might be for if you're more experienced and know the different keys, because in order to find D7 and to know that you need this major third and the flat 7 of the D, that might be a lot of info, especially with everything else that we've added. But some of you already know this, so you can always go up a fourth. And we're going to get into this a little more next time, but basically you can always find a progression before the existing chord if you go down a fourth. So that enables us to navigate all the keys and be able to substitute chords and add additional chords and add more ideas to a song and different ideas for harmony and possibilities as we wish. So that leads us to the next adventure, which is number 18. Is it number 18? I'm losing track. Yes, it is 18. So we're going to play Amazing Grace with additional chords inserted before existing chords. And you can start simple and just do the tenths and not the other notes in the scale. But you can also start with the approach chords that we introduced last time, and see where that goes. So that is the lesson for today. There's really a lot that happened through this session, so I want to really encourage you to reach out if there's any questions, and because because a lot of this is also review for the more experienced students, I want to get into some more advanced ideas with you for how we can substitute chords, add additional chords, and also learn how to trick out the dominant chord, because the dominant chord is so powerful that it's like it has its own world that we can explore, instead of just playing this straight. This is a basic G7, but we can also add what are called alterations to the G7, and they create additional dissonance, but also additional intrigue, because they allow us to add sounds that we wouldn't normally hear on the G7, but actually that still point us towards the 1 chord. So it would sound like this, for example. for joining me, and we will continue where we left off here, and expand this idea to being able to recognize all sorts of song patterns. And where we're going is basically to give you a lot of options when you are understanding songs, either writing your own or taking songs that you hear and wanting to learn them. So kind of an easy way into understanding whatever song that's out there, to learn it, and then to customize it as you want, or to use that as an example for making your own things. So I can't wait to do that in more in depth, and definitely let me know if there's any questions or comments on anything, or to show me what you've come up with. Thanks a lot.